Hello, housemates, and welcome back to the River Lethe. Today we're starting on a new game, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. This is one of my favorite RPGs of all time. It's not a new game, so it quite fits the bill. It is perhaps forgotten by many, perhaps overlooked to begin with, but not entirely forgotten, because even though the game is a decade old, it has received a great deal of loving attention from some of its fan base. The version of the game that we will be playing in this playthrough is patched with Wesp 5's Unofficial Patch, which is sort of the go-to patch on the normal version of the game, not to really add much new content, but to restore the content that was already there. So this is a very typical thing to do with a lot of games. Some fans will unlock content that was already in there, make sure it works right, remove some of the bugs, and then release it. So I'm quite excited to play through this. It doesn't add enough, I understand, to make this really a blind playthrough for me. I've played this game many times, and so I will know most of what's going to happen. So you can consider this a kind of thorough walkthrough, probably. So what we're going to do in this first video is just talk about character creation. Obviously, in any role-playing game, you have to set some stats, you have to choose some abilities and whatnot at the beginning, and if you choose wrong, it can make things a little bit difficult for you. Or you can find out that you chose in a way that doesn't really support the play style you were looking for. So hopefully this video can help you avoid that unfortunate fate. So we're going to start a new game. We're going to go through character creation, and then we'll watch the opening cinematic, which is a bit lengthy, and then we'll cut this episode off, and the next episode we'll start with actual gameplay. So without further ado, let's get into it. So if you're not familiar with the World of Darkness setting, it's a White Wolf Games RPG setting in which there are various paranormal creatures. The standard werewolves and vampires, wizards, and then Frankenstein-like monsters called Prometheans, and all sorts of other stuff as well. There's the old World of Darkness book series, upon which this is based, which has Vampire the Masquerade. It's not set in the universe with the new World of Darkness, which is Vampire the Requiem. So things are pretty different in terms of lore and mechanics between the two of them. Some of the names will sound familiar to you if you're familiar with New World of Darkness, some of the clan names, some of them won't. So there's really a lot of good background story in this to be familiar with, especially the period of time in the lore which this game is set. It's kind of set in the end times of the old World of Darkness continuity. Alright, so when you're creating a character, you get to choose two ways of doing it. You can answer a series of questions about your playstyle, and the game will generate a character for you. So I've never actually done this because that doesn't give me the minute amount of control I prefer to have over my character settings, but you can certainly do it. It will ask you sort of how you might solve problems. It's kind of like the questions you get asked in a lot of the beginning of the Fallout games, for it to kind of choose your attributes or quirks or whatever they're called for you. That's the kind of thing that this is. So if you want to do that, go ahead. This character generator introduction video will be more about the second option, where you go directly to the sheet and select everything for yourself. So we're going to go for 2 here. Now, there are three big things here. This last one, Histories, is where the patch, this Wesp 5 unofficial patch, comes in a big way. In the original version, the vanilla version of the game, there's really nothing here for these histories, but there is a lot here for the histories in the patched version. But let's go look at the clans first. There are 7 clans. Wait, is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, 7 clans that you can choose from. And they offer more than just a mechanical difference in some cases. They will garner different dialogue, sometimes different quests, an entirely different way of doing quests sometimes, and occasionally it opens up different narrative paths a little bit as well. You can read the description of the classes yourself, which give you a little bit of description of their personalities, and also a little bit of the description of their mechanics. So the Brujah kind of like anarchist-leaning vampires, people who are revolutionaries and things like that. You have the Gangrels, who are, this pose, this non-human pose that they're taking there indicates that they're sort of the wild vampires out in the wilderness, or the urban wilderness even. They have a shape-shifting power. So if that kind of thing appeals to you, then the Gangrel are your clan. Then you have the Malkavians, who are sort of these lunatic visionaries. I will say one thing, if you've never played through this game before, I do not recommend that your first playthrough is with the Malkavians. The Malkavians, with their mad insight ability, can spoil some things about the story if you're paying attention. So from the very beginning, you can figure out the way things are going to go, and I think that for your first playthrough, you want to be more blind than even playing through as the Malkavians would allow you. They are very interesting to play as, and you can get some story insight that is unavailable to you even just playing through the game thoroughly with another clan, but still, I would refrain from doing it until your second playthrough. After the Malkavians, we have the Nosferatu. So this is, as the name suggests, your prototypical ugly, gross vampire. And that does not just affect the aesthetic of your character, it heavily affects the way you play the game. Because if anyone sees you, it is automatically a Masquerade violation. What's that? Well, you see up here these 5 masks. You get 5 Masquerade violations before you automatically lose the game, because other vampires come and kill you for exposing them to the world of mortals. Once you get around 3 Masquerade violations, you'll start being stalked by vampire hunters. So it's bad news. Any vampire clan can accumulate these violations, but it's much easier for the Nosferatu to do so, and therefore they are much more dangerous and much more difficult to play. You have to stay out of sight, which means you often take entirely different paths to complete quests than the other clans will. After that, we have the Toreador, who are your pretty boy, pretty girl vampires. We have the Tremere, who are your wizard, mage vampires. And finally, we have the Ventru, who are your corporate vampires, basically the antithesis of the Brujah that we started with. So that's a quick and dirty description of each clan, not really talking about their abilities so much. You can look at that on your own. The next thing to talk about is gender. Usually, and in the vanilla game, the gender makes no difference. In role-playing games on computer, often you'll get some minor dialogue variations, some different romance options, but that's about the extent of the effect that gender has. There's a little bit more here in these RPGs. So for instance, we can see that there are these histories. These histories change a little bit how your stats are prioritized. That is, which type of stat you get more points in. It will change the default version of the clan, so it'll change around what kind of skills you have. So if you want to play a Brujah, but who's not necessarily sort of the physically strength-based one that the normal Brujah are, you can pick one of these histories and it will tell you how to swap the priority. So for instance, this true Brujah is a scholar rather than a thug. Now, where gender comes to make a difference is, let's look at the Toreador. So we have the male, and here we have beautiful monster, right? Now, if you switch to female, instead you have decadent enchantress. These are not merely verbal variations describing the same game effects. They, in fact, do different things. So there are some histories which are unavailable to you as a female version, a female character of one clan, instead of the male version of that clan. So it can make a difference as to which histories you can choose. And it will also, as usual, make some minor dialogue differences as to who, what random passersby you can and cannot seduce, because we all know that vampires are about seduction. So, what we're going to do, let's see, I've played through as all of these before. I'm not going to play through as a Malkavian because, you know, as I've said, that would spoil some things for you if this is the first time that you've encountered the game. Nosferatu is a bit difficult. It's an interesting playthrough. I'm always partial to the Tremere. They have an interesting alternative storyline thing that you can get into because they're kind of shunned a little bit by the other clans. If you are looking to have a kind of easy time, it's not very easy, but it's a little bit easier. You want to pick something like Ventrue. The Ventrue's blood disciplines, the things that they spend their blood to use their superhuman abilities for, lend themselves to being rather tough, and also to being able to navigate conversations pretty well. And that's another thing you want to consider. This is a role-playing game which is heavy on conversation, and conversation, charisma-based skills are very important to opening up multiple ways, easier ways to complete quests, and extra rewarding ways. So if you've ever played a pencil and paper version of Old World of Darkness, you know that usually the way they're set up is you get a certain amount of XP for completing a chapter, and you can get bonus XP for unlocking a secret part of the chapter or completing the goals in a non-standard way. That's just the same in the computer version of the game. So if you can do a different way of solving a problem, of completing a quest than is suggested to you by the quest giver, you will often find that you get extra XP. If you can talk people into things, that sometimes itself will give you extra XP. So it's really worth investing into some social stats. So we still haven't gone any way to deciding how we're going to do this. I think that we will do the the Tremere, because I like the wizardiness. So we can go with Tremere, we can go with female. Looks kind of like maybe a fortune teller, gypsy. Or the male, who has this really weird shirt that's pretty cool and an eyebrow piercing. I think I'm going to go with the male. I like the shirt, I like the belt, I like the whole look he's got going here. So, male, Tremere, his name is not going to be Lydia. We will call him Corbin. What about a history? So, we've got a bunch to choose from. We can do Old Timer, Country Club Lothario, Con Artist, Highway Drifter, Eerie Presence, Deceptive Strength, Eldritch Prodigy, Infernal, Affinity for Magic, or Generalissimo. Alright, let's read through these a little bit. You are old-fashioned and don't care about new technology. It's harder to raise your computer knowledge, but you start with a bonus in scholarship. So there is, you might call it hacking. There's some information that you can get sometimes only on computers, or things that you can only unlock, like safes if you have certain computer skills, and just generally different ways to complete quests that are only available to you if you can quote-unquote hack, which is basically just guessing someone's password. The better you are at hacking, the better you are at randomly guessing a person's password. That's how it works. So, if you pick the Old Timer, it's going to be harder for you to do that. Country Club Lothario, you simply swap the order of your attributes. So Tremere, I believe, are mental, social, physical usually, and this changes it to social, physical, mental, because, you know, you play sports and you schmooze. That's what you do as the Country Club Lothario. Con Artist, it switches the order of your abilities. So there are abilities and there are attributes which are distinct things. So this switches. I believe that the normal version is knowledge, skills, talents. Highway Drifter. You start the game with 1 point in melee, but it will cost you more experience points to buy humanity, and you are more likely to frenzy. So, this brings up a couple more mechanics. Humanity we see as a stat right up here in the top. The more dots in it you have, the closer you are to retaining shreds of your humanity, even though you become an undead monster. The fewer dots you have here, the closer you are to being a ravening, blood-thirsty beast. The fewer points you have, the more likely it is that when you get injured and when you drop down to lower health, you will lose control of your character, who will run around for about 30 seconds and just bite the shit out of anything he sees, thirsting for blood. The more humanity you have, the less likely that is. So you can see this gives you a bit of a double whammy. You can spend experience points if you've busily frittered away your humanity and get some of it back. But it costs more as the Highway Drifter. And when you have low humanity, you are extra likely to frenzy, more so than you were even before at low humanity. So it's very likely that if you don't watch your health with this character, if you don't stay out of melee combat, well, you're going to go on a rampage. Now, it's pretty easy if you know what to do to keep your humanity up by making the, let's say, right choices. There aren't really right choices, but it's easy to circumvent this problem. But it's probably not worth it for that 1 point of melee. Eerie Presence. It costs less experience to raise your mental attributes, but it costs you more to raise your social and stealth. So people think you're weird, and they can always tell when you're around, even if they can't see you. Stealth is fairly important in this game, especially for particular ways of completing quests, and as I already said, social attributes are pretty important, at least for the way I like to play this game. Deceptive Strength. You can never raise dexterity and perception above 3, but when you use blood buff, it lasts longer. So this means that you are limited in how many points you can put into your these two stats here, dexterity and perception. But your blood buff lasts longer, and what blood buff does is it pumps up your dexterity, perception, and strength to 5. So it means that you can't raise them naturally, but you just have to use your blood buff a bit more. Now, sometimes you're not allowed to use blood buff, I believe, in certain scenarios, and sometimes you won't have enough blood to use it, and you might want to have your dexterity and perception above 3. Probably not on this character. Perception feeds into gun battles, and dexterity feeds into dodging and stealth. So this is a fairly significant limitation, but not crippling. It's probably easy to work with. All right. Eldritch Prodigy. You start with 1 extra point in thaumaturgy. That's your wizard spells, basically. However, you suffer a 1-point penalty to any experience award of 3 or more. So that means anytime you would get 3 experience or more, you instead get that -1. That is a pretty significant penalty. Over time, that can really stack up and put you behind. It's probably not worth that extra 1 point at the beginning. Infernal. Advancement in thaumaturgy costs you less experience, but Auspex has half the duration, and you may never raise Dominate above 3. So this basically means that you can advance in your wizard skills more quickly at less of a cost of experience, but it really limits your other 2 blood disciplines. So all vampire clans have a unique set of 3 disciplines. For the, what are these called again? The Tremere, they have Thaumaturgy, Auspex, and Dominate. Auspex is like a second sight. It allows you to see the auras of creatures through walls and that kind of thing. It boosts your wits and perception, I believe. And Dominate is something that you can use to control people. At some point when you have enough in combat, you can make them commit suicide. And you can also use it in conversation to a limited degree. The Venture are the ones who are best at using Dominate in conversation. You will have a more limited ability to do so as the Tremere. So this one is not so bad, as long as you are willing to play based on your wizarding skills primarily. Affinity for magic. Let's see. You can more easily advance in thaumaturgy, but you have more difficulty learning all other things. This doesn't tell you exactly how it works, but I'm pretty sure that means that you spend fewer experience points on thaumaturgy and more on everything else. That sounds like a pretty severe penalty. And finally, Generalissimo. You swap the priority of your attributes to physical, mental, social. So, this one sounds like it's pretty good. So Auspex, I'm not limited in the points that I can use. It just doesn't last as long. It just means I have to be a bit smarter as to how I use it, and that's not so bad. And never raising Dominate above 3 isn't so bad. It means that I can't get the mass suicide ability, and there are 5 dots in each of these, so I'm missing the last 2. That's not so bad either, so I'm going to go with Infernal. And the description here, your 4 bearers, it should be 4 bearers, not 4 bears, paid an awful price in their quest for power. The deal still holds, and you'll continue to pay for all eternity. Maybe it wasn't such a bad deal. If I can boil people's blood, it doesn't so much matter if I can't dominate their minds. Alright, so we are Corbin, the male Tremere with a history of infernal darkness in his family. Let's continue. Now we move on to the stat sheet. So in parentheses is how many points you have to distribute. You can see that in my attributes here, I have 1 physical point to distribute and 2 mental points to distribute. Now, when you get into spending experience, it will not be a 1-for-1. As you go up in the dots, it costs more experience. So, dexterity determines the speed and agility of your character. It makes you better at lockpicking. It makes you better at sneaking. It makes you better at dodging, I believe, as well. And it will tell you over here, if you mouse over, how that these feats are determined. They are determined by an interaction between stats and abilities, right? So, you have unarmed combat, melee combat, ranged combat, combat defense. So combat defense here, the wits and dodge ability both contribute to combat defense. Dodge is just a feat. So dodge increases defense. So dexterity actually has nothing to do with it. Just lock picking and sneaking. Stamina is basically increases your soak bashing. So soak is down here, how much damage you sort of ignore. Increasing bashing damage. Soak means you take less from bashing. Lethal and aggravated damage are damage which sort of aggravated damage heals very slowly, and lethal damage is just, well, more difficult to defend against. Alright, so I think that we're going to go with some dexterity. We can't add anything here. With our mental stats, perception is good for ranged combat and inspection. Inspection basically will show you things in the environment that you might not otherwise see. I think there are also some very few conversation checks that deal with perception, so it might be worth putting some in here, especially if you're going to do ranged combat focus. Now, my spells don't count there. They're talking about guns in particular. Have intelligence. This is good for research and intimidate. Research is what you need to read the skill-enhancing books that you find around, and again, for certain conversation options. Finally, there's wits. Wits improves your defense, and hacking. So, most likely, thematically, intelligence is the best for me. It helps me intimidate people, which isn't necessarily the social route that I prefer to go for. Perception is also a good choice, if only because I know there's a particular social interaction for which it's good. Defense and hacking, this is sort of a tough choice here. I think that I'll go with perception. So my inspection is now 2. Now inspection is based on perception and investigate. And I'll go with intelligence. Now we have our abilities, of which there are 6, divided 2, 1, 3. So we have brawl, dodge, intimidation, and subterfuge over here. Brawl is punching people, and it makes it easier to feed. So if in combat you need to feed on somebody who's fighting, the better your brawl is, the more easily you will feed upon them and restore your blood total. Dodge is, well, dodge. You know how that works. Intimidation is one of the social skills, if you can call intimidation a social skill. It allows you to unlock certain conversation options and get what you want out of people by threatening them. Subterfuge is another type of social conversation option, which allows you to lie to people to get what you want, and also to seduce them. So in this game, when you seduce someone, you are invariably lying to them. So we're going to go with subterfuge, and more subterfuge. Here with abilities, there's firearms, that's guns obviously, melee, that's bats and swords and crowbars and severed arms. Yes, you get to beat people with a severed arm at some point. Security, which lets you undo locks, and stealth, which lets you run around in crouch mode and be less likely to be spotted. So both security and stealth are very useful and important in this game. Which one do I want? I think that I will start off with security. I need to get into some places occasionally. And finally we have knowledge. Computer knowledge lets you do hacking stuff. Finance knowledge lets you haggle. This one is perhaps more useful since the patch, but not overall terribly useful. Investigation, which helps you with inspection, and scholarship, which helps you with research and persuasion. So you can see over here my public skills, my social skills. Haggle is at 1, intimidate is at 2, persuasion is at 1, and seduction is at 3. So I'm going to try and increase my persuasion. I am going to increase my investigation. I'm going to increase my computer. So you can see, as we update our attributes and abilities, the feats update themselves. So you can see how that pans out over here. Finally, we need to get our discipline. So remember, I can never raise dominate above 3, which means I can only get up to suicide. Forces the victim to suffer a fatal fit. What I cannot get is possession or mass suicide. I don't think that's a terribly big loss. Auspex, it basically just adds 1 point to wits, 1 point to wit and perception, 2 to wit, 1 to perception, 2 and 2, and then finally 3 and 3. So this is telling me it lasts 36 seconds per activation, and that is including the history thing that I have, which cuts it in half, right? So that's not really a significant penalty that we've suffered. Thaumaturgy is the one that I'll be focusing on. Now, one thing to consider here and now is that since it's easier for me to advance in thaumaturgy, it might not be quite as worth to spend my point in it now. It's probably more worthy to spend my point in Auspex or Domination, which will not have a reduced experience cost. Now, I could go straight to the higher bit of Dominate, which sort of brain wipes, which makes people think they haven't seen me, or I could increase what I get here, adding to my perception for a little bit. I'm thinking that right now I will go with Auspex, and I will save Thaumaturgy to be bought with experience. So we've assigned all our points. We can double check to make sure there's nothing we want to change. We're pretty good here. We're pretty good here. I'm obviously not going to be combat centered. I'm going to want to get Thaumaturgy up. So right now I sort of hit people with a blood missile. I can make them vomit blood at the next level. I can make a blood shield the level after that. I can fire several blood bullets, and then finally I can boil the blood of my foes. All right, so we're not going to skip the intro. We're going to accept this character, and since this video has already gone pretty long, I think we will start with the intro video at the beginning of our second video in the series, where we will also get in some gameplay. I hope that you've enjoyed this character creation introduction tutorial. If people have questions about other characters, please ask them in the comments. If you like this video, please like it and consider subscribing to my channel. And until next time, I don't care what you do.